What's going on, guys? Today I am here with CJ DelVecchio. CJ is a prominent realtor who has served as the president of the Ithaca Board of Realtors and in 2022 was named New York State Realtor of the Year. Today we're going to be talking about both real estate in general and also some of CJ's personal experiences as a realtor. So, CJ, it's good to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. So I want to start off with you've obviously been in the business for a while, but I'm curious about, what initially got you interested in real estate? Was there a defining moment or a specific thing that made you realize, okay, this is what I want to do?
There was a defining moment. Yeah. So, a lot of people, like myself, come to real estate as a second career. So, I actually had a career in the theater arts for about 9 years before I ended up working for a company in College Town called Housing Solutions, which I'm not sure, I don't think they're still around or it's not that name. So they were an early match.com for landlords and tenants.
Interesting.
Yeah, as a computer science major, you would be very interested in this. So this was in 1996. Sorry, 1994 is when I first started working for them. I left in 96. And so I was very interested in that because what would happen is that we would have landlords come in and they would submit, kind of like the Realtor MLS database. They would give us all their details of their apartments for rent. And then students like yourself would come in as tenants and they would search, put in the parameters. I want a 3-bedroom, 1 bath, under 1,000, a month in these certain areas. And boom, there's the list. And we would create a list and we charge you, I think it was like $10 or $15. We charge you for a list. And it was actually, you could come back and get maybe 2 more lists after that if that first list didn't work out. And then we would charge the landlords as well. So we charge the landlords, we would charge the tenants, and we would make a match. So it was pretty cool. And from there, I met a lot of the landlords in town. And I was wooed away by one of the well, actually, it was kind of a medium-sized landlord who wanted to have a commercial realtor help develop a particular corner up on South Hill. And I was interested in learning that, and I was kind of, 2 years, I was in my 20s, and, when you're in your 20s, like 2 years is a long time as far as work life. And so I said, I'm interested in doing that. So I started to do that. And then I got lured away again by what it was at the time the largest firm in town, which was Audrey Edelman and Associates. And I started working for Audrey Edelman in '96. So from there, 28 years ago, here I am.
There we go.
Here we go.
And did how did that work making the transition? Because you're involved in real estate, but it's not quite the same as being a realtor.
Yeah, the hardest transition is the 100% commission-based
Right.
life, which is very difficult when you first start out because you're building a clientele list of your own. So what you do is I did probably the first year or two I was a realtor. I was doing open houses every weekend, getting my name out. And back then we had newspaper ads, and we would take actually newspaper ads. We had a local TV channel where we advertise ourselves on the TV channel. So I would do all of that marketing to sort of just get my name out there. And then after a while, you start about 5 years into the business, you start to really have, some clients built up. And then, of course, you have hopefully a lot of repeat business, a lot of repeat clients. And they say, CJ did such a great job, you got to use CJ.
Yeah, to me it seems like, obviously I don't have firsthand experience, but to me it seems like being a realtor, being a successful one at least, it's kind of just a game of relationships and trust. So
It is all about relationships and trust.
exactly, once you have established yourself a bit, people know you, it's easier to, I guess, get new business. But when you're first starting out, you really have no track record. So I guess the way around that is just volume, and eventually
There's a couple of different ways to do it, and I certainly tried, a lot of different ways. One new way that's sort of come into play is this team concept, where there's these real estate teams, and they're really just a group of agents that decide to work together. And, one of the benefits of a team is that the newer agents get to learn hands-on, and they might get those kind of leads where, someone like myself, there's only so many hours in the day that I can handle that many clients. So anyone who's new who comes to me, if I really don't feel like I have the time for them at that time, I might say, look, I've been mentoring a great agent. Here's this person. I will be in the background guiding them, but they're the ones that are boots on the ground. They're the ones that are gonna, take you around all the houses that you want to see, etc.
So how often is it the case that, let's say someone is maybe buying a house or selling a house, how often is it that they, let's say they don't currently have a realtor. When they're going to get a new one, is it usually the case that they seek out a specific person, or maybe they go to a firm? Because, if you're a new realtor and an established firm, maybe they'll have a surplus of people coming in that.
Yeah, so there's there's what they call floor time,
Yeah.
which is you basically come in and you answer the calls that come in for people who say, I want a Warren realtor. I don't know anybody, but I like that firm. And so they'll either, pop in, walk-ins, or most likely they'll call. Sometimes they'll email. I mean, a lot of people just are behind technology now, so they'll email or their text. And so, yeah, there's opportunity there as well. I myself, I don't do floor time. I always tell people, I'm like, if you get me on the phone, it's like, okay, most of my business is repeat or referral business. And it's like, you lucked out today because you got me, because I usually don't answer the phone here. But, obviously if I'm the only one here, or, occasionally people walk in and I'm the only one here, then I'll help them, of course.
So, you already have an existing, expansive client base and a lot of referrals and whatnot. How often is it that you create an entirely new relationship or take on a totally new client?
Well, a lot of people that are referred to me are new.
Yeah.
So I sold a house to somebody and they say CJ was great. Or somebody that I listed a house in a neighborhood and they're like, they don't know me, but they saw I sold their house. The people said great things. So it's often, I would say probably half every year are newer people that I don't have a relationship, because people really only buy or sell 3 times, 4 times in their whole lifetime.
Yeah.
On average, I think the national average is what, 7 years people are in their houses now. It used to be 5, now it's 7. People are holding on to their houses because, of course, it's hard to find a house to buy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say you are that new realtor, someone who just got their license, and maybe you don't have that track record, and you're talking to someone who, they're already gonna buy or sell a house and they're deciding who they're gonna go with. It's kind of, I imagine you kind of have to sell yourself to them a little bit to get them
Definitely.
to pick you over anyone else. So I guess, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the more experience you have, the easier it gets.
Exactly.
Because people are attracted to someone who's been around the block. And obviously that's what I sell. After 28 years, I say what's great about real estate is that every day is different. I like that aspect of it. But on the other hand, there's always challenges and there's always something new that comes up that you haven't quite experienced before. But the one benefit of experience is that you may not know how to handle, you may not have come across that particular challenge, but you know how to address it. You know how to problem solve. Really what you're hiring with a realtor is a problem solver, somebody who, gets you basically from point A to point B, closing day, with as little hassle as possible.
Is it the case that, most deals will have, these little things that are different that, like you said, it's maybe something you haven't seen before? Because to me it seems like, and I don't know the exact details of the process, but it seems like in general it's mostly the same process, or is that?
It is the same process, but the factor that's different with every deal is the human factor.
Right.
It's the people that you're dealing with and the emotions that people have.
Exactly.
The reason I still have a job is that I go into somebody's house to help them sell it. I haven't lived there for 30 years. I don't have the memories of raising my kids there, the parties that people have and all of that. I go in very clinically and I say, this is worth this compared to the other things on the market that have sold recently. And, when we're going through each step, there are pain points along the way. And so again, I have that objectivity. So that's really another thing that you're hiring is somebody who is objective, who's going to really be a guide, take you every step of the way. But really the difference with every deal is the human factor and how that all, I mean, I always tell people it's a weird gig, real estate, because, commission based, I only get paid when I'm there at closing day, successful, right, transaction. There are things that go wrong that are completely out of my control. Somebody builds a fence 5 feet over the property line. I didn't build that fence. My client didn't build that fence, but we have to deal with what they call an encroachment, a fence. And I had somebody who built their driveway 25 feet over the property line. I mean, that was a problem.
Yeah.
That deal failed.
Yeah.
We did eventually sell the house, not to that buyer, to a different buyer. But, I think the other thing too is really having a good sense of humor about things and really focusing on your client's outcome and not getting so concerned about your own investment in the deal. A lot of the trainers, the national speakers I go to, I've learned a lot from, and even Deepak Chopra, I don't know if you follow him, but one of his big things is, let go of the outcome, right? Really, my job is to focus on getting them to the outcome, but I'm not invested in the outcome until we're there at the closing day. And that really helps. I think you also have to, license law, you have to put your client's needs first. That's hard for a lot of people.
Exactly. And part of that, I mean, I imagine you can't really be thinking about the outcome too early because, like you said, the nature of it is that you really don't know for sure until you actually sign on the dotted line on closing day. And I mean, in your experience, how often is it that maybe, a day before or a week before, you think it's going good, the deal, everything looks good, and then right at the last second it goes away?
It seems more now than ever that there's more issues getting to closing day. And somebody said to me recently, do you always post about your closings on social media? I said, yeah, I always do. First of all, it's free, right? I don't pay for, putting a social media post, but it is a great day to celebrate because it's like an orchestra. There's so many moving parts and everybody knows their job. But again, somebody plays the wrong note, that makes that, piece just fail. And so, yeah, it's really a cause for celebration because it is more and more difficult to get to closing day with there's so many regulations. And I had a client who had a large piece of land listed, and he enlisted in the Army in 1950 something. And he said, CJ, when I enlisted in the Army, I signed one piece of paper to basically give my life to my country. I mean, there's not one piece of paper in real estate. There's a lot of paper. We like paper. We like documents. Yeah.
So how many, I guess, let's say I'm asking.
Sure.
What exactly is the general process of buying a home? We talked a little bit about this earlier. You have an earnest money deposit, which means that you're serious, or you're seriously considering it. Then maybe there's also a down payment and closing, and it's not something that you do in just one day. So
that's right. You can do it in one day.
You can.
I'd love it if you did it in one day.
Yeah, but typically not. So
right. So the first step actually is, of course, figuring out where your financials are. That's actually the first step. Before we ever go looking at houses, what I usually do is I have a buyer consult. It can be over Zoom. I love Zoom consults. It's convenient for a lot of people. They don't have to come in. But we go over the whole process, and we sit down and I look at what it is they're looking to do. Where obviously you have to come up with your list of wants and needs, right? Things you absolutely would love, right? Those are your wants. 2-car attached garage, that's always a big one. And then there's things like, what do I really need? Well, do I need that garage? I don't need it. I'd like it, sort of thing. Usually, if you're not paying cash, then I'll send you to a bank. A lender of your choice, preferably a local lender. We prefer local lenders because they know our customs here, and they know how to make the deal get to closing day. New York banking regulations are very, very, strenuous, and some of these online banks just, they may be good for Las Vegas, but they're not good for New York State. But go to the bank, get your pre-qualification done, and then let's look at houses. Let's see what's out there. Right now, buyers have been a little bit constrained because there's not a lot of selection. Prices are pretty high. Market's kind of changed a little bit better for buyers, meaning that maybe you don't have 10 other buyers competing for the same house. Maybe you only have one. Maybe you're lucky enough that you don't have any. In that case, the prices be a little bit more negotiable. And then it's really a 2 to 3 month process here in New York State, because you have a bank involved if you're getting a loan, which is, 60 to 70% of all the buyers out there. And then in New York State, we also use attorneys to close, to actually review the title documents and get you to closing date to make sure that what you're buying is marketable, that once you buy the house, the next day, if you decide to sell it, it's a good title. Just like when you buy a car, you get a title. When you buy a house, you get a title. Same thing.
So, because I hear about title companies a lot. Is that just attorneys, lawyers who check that?
Title companies. So when you get a loan, the bank will require you to get title insurance.
Okay.
Other states use title companies to close. Basically, what they're doing is they're making you buy your own insurance policy to make sure there's no problems in the future. If there's a problem, let's say that somebody 3 cousins over from the previous owners comes to you and says, hey, look, I got a deed. I own this property. You don't own this property. Well, I own it. Then the title insurance company steps in and they say they're going to defend you because you bought the property with good marketable title. So it's an insurance policy that you buy, and that's handled by title companies. In New York State, they still require you to get the bank coverage covering the amount of your loan for the title insurance, but then your attorney you can talk to about whether you get what's called an owner's policy.
So when they say they're going to defend you, I mean, does that mean, let's say, okay, if it goes to court, is that what that means?
Yeah,
Okay.
They're going to hire the attorneys and, defend you in court if needed.
How often is that the case that there are these?
In New York State, it's very rare
Yeah.
because we use attorneys. And what attorneys do is they actually read your title. So when you buy a house, you get what's called an abstract of title. It could be like this big. Sometimes they're like this big. It depends on, it's the ownership record. It's actually a compilation of everyone who's ever owned the property. Now, in New York State, we only go back, I think, 40 years. So if somebody who has a house from 1850 doesn't have the title from 1850, they only go back 40 years. So it's only going to be this big. If they're from 1850, guess what? Might be this big. Anyway, the attorneys read that title. They read the abstract of title, and they go back 40 years to say, looks like everything's good. There's no problems. What usually comes up is divorce situation where one gives what's called a quitclaim deed to the other, wasn't done properly. A lot of times we have missing discharges of mortgage, like you took a mortgage out, you paid your mortgage. Well, that's great, but it was never recorded in the public records. Missing the discharge of mortgage. So technically, it looks like you still owe money on that property, liens. That's the other thing the attorneys do, is they make sure you're not inheriting as a buyer any liens that the seller may have. Like they hired a roofer and they didn't fully pay the roofer, and then the roofer puts what's called a mechanic's lien. They say, guess what? You owe me $5,000 still. And you don't want to inherit that problem.
No, of course.
So that's the other main reason that you use attorneys. They make sure you're not inheriting any problems, and that title is a clean, marketable title.
So you said that, in New York, because they do it that way, it's, very rare that this happens where they have this sort of dispute and this whole thing. I guess I'm curious, how does I don't know if that's not exactly regulation, it's more of a process, but it made me think, how does the regulation and the, all the technical paperwork, that type of stuff in New York compare to, let's say Texas or California or Idaho?
Well, one big advantage of these other states that use title companies is the closing can be much faster, like 30 days or less. So that is one huge advantage. They're basically paying an insurance policy to get to a quicker closing. So oftentimes we'll have a lot of people from Texas that come to me and say, what are you talking about, 60 days to close? I just closed in 15 days on my property in Dallas. I'm like, yep, that's Texas, that's not New York. So that is a big shocker. to a lot of people that come to New York that aren't familiar with the process.
Is part of it, and I don't know if this is true, but if you do a deal, let's say, I think it's called off market, right? When you do it without a realtor as the intermediary, does that have less paperwork and is that typically faster, or is it just the same amount and you have to figure it out yourself?
It generally it's not faster because a contract is a contract.
Right.
The disclosures that are required are disclosures. There's a little bit less paperwork because yes, as realtors we have a couple extra disclosures that we're required to provide and have people sign. Maybe 4 or 5, but they're still using attorneys because the reality is that what the attorney does is they prepare the new deed. If you're doing it by yourself, how do you know how to do that?
Right.
I mean, there's also a transfer tax that the seller pays that you have to fill out. Do you know to fill that out? What usually happens is the attorneys don't love it as much because, of course, they're doing a lot of the extra work that the realtor would be doing. Plus, running around, too. The attorneys aren't going to run around and distribute keys, be there for well testing, septic pumping and inspection, home inspection, bank appraiser. I mean, all these sort of, third parties that touch the transaction. That's the other reason that the realtors ensure a smooth transaction is that we know at what stage the bank loan appraisers coming knocking, when the home inspection will be done, if there was, well and septic testing with it, with it's not municipal water and sewer, which is pretty much any rural property.
That makes sense. And hearing that, it seems like there are a lot of things that you need to know as a realtor. Maybe there's a few main things, like a few core competencies. You want to be able to talk to people, you want to know your local market, you want to, I guess, know regulation and things like that. What would you say is the most important thing as far as being a successful realtor?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. The most important thing, I think, is to have empathy. It's because you're really dealing with people's livelihood and money, and you really have to, empathize with where people are at and meet them where they're at in order to help them. Listening skills, things like that. It's the interpersonal skills that you need to have. Yes, definitely need to have the knowledge. Have to know what disclosures. You really have to know and have connections and networking with all the affiliates, surveyors, like I said, inspectors, etc. But really it comes down to being able to help people. You have to put yourself in their shoes.
And do you think that that's something you can develop, or is it kind of just something you have?
I do think that you can learn to be better at that. I think that if you don't have that empathy, it's going to be very hard. And people don't necessarily, you might get a lot of first-time clients, but you probably won't get a lot of repeat clients because people are pretty sharp.
Yeah.
They understand and they could sense when somebody is doing this just for themselves and not really doing it to help other people.
Right.
That's really the thing about closing day that's so great is that sense of accomplishment. I helped these people. They had a task, they had a goal, and I helped them get there. Now, do I always successfully get them exactly their price? I can't control the market. The market is what the market is. I hopefully guide them and do as best as I can, but really just helping people move here and there, out of houses, into houses, it's very gratifying.
So it's really just about being able to put yourself in their shoes and say, "Hey, I'm on your side. I'm working with you."
That's right. That's right. And part of our disclosure law is about that too. I mean, you will sign, when you hire me as an agent, you sign an agreement. Now it's required that you have to sign an agreement, which talks about the compensation, and we would get into that. But there's also an agency disclosure, which talks about my fiduciary responsibilities to you.
Right.
Confidentiality. Anything you tell me is between us. It never goes to the other side. The other thing is a lot of people are like, well, I'll just use the listing agent to buy. And it's like, you can do that, but guess what? They will give you no advocacy. You will not have somebody helping you fight for the right price, negotiate on that roof that needs to be replaced, navigate you through all the financial steps with the bank, how to interpret, a commitment letter and what that means. There's a lot of things that you, particularly if you haven't ever done it before, that you're going to need a guide for.
Yeah. I guess one thing I'm curious about is kind of related to that. I think I forget the word, but the fiduciary duty. This is just me asking because I'm curious. Is it the case that realtors have to present every single offer?
Yes, that's license law.
Even if it's, over the phone?
Not verbally, no. No.
Okay.
All written offers.
So formal offers, but
yes.
If someone says, hey, I'll buy it for $500, it's because it's not serious, right?
Well, verbal is not enforceable in New York State.
Okay.
Right? You can have a verbal, it's, gets into contract law, and I'm not a lawyer, just full disclosure, I'm not interpreting, but our license law requires that we make every effort to get it in writing. So no, we are not obligated to present verbal offers. Do we present verbal offers? Yeah, sure, occasionally if there's physical limitations. Sometimes you have folks that, for whatever reason, can't put pen to paper immediately. Sometimes with a timely market, if you want to just let the other agent know, just show this house, I know you have an offer on the table, my people are going to offer, and this is what they're going to offer. Sure, we communicate that. Definitely anything in writing, we are obligated, up until the time of closing.
Yeah.
Up until the time of closing, which a lot of people get confused about. Yeah.
So I guess the answer is for verbal offers, it's kind of discretionary. You don't have to. Maybe if you think it's in their best interest, you'll present it. And I assume those are mostly going to be over the phone, which brings me to my next question. When you're talking to someone over the phone, maybe in the first few calls, are you able to, tell if they're serious or not, or what type of buyer they are, things like that? Or do you have to wait until you meet them? I mean, how easy is it to get a read on potential buyers?
It's hard over the phone for sure. Yeah. I think that obviously our job is really to, have that face. That's why Zoom is great, because Zoom actually adds that. Yeah. It's not it's not in person, but it is face to face. And you could tell the nuances by looking at people's faces, exactly. What the reaction is. So yeah, it's really hard. And, a phone call is the start of a conversation about whether I'm the right person to help you. And I've had people where I just don't feel like I'm the right realtor for them. And I will say that to them, like, you probably need somebody who's a little bit better at this or that or whatever it is that I feel like I'm not a good match. I think that's also comes with experience too, because when you're new, you're like, I'm going to work with everyone. Yeah. Well, the reality is you can't work with everyone. You're not a match personality-wise for everyone. I mean, obviously you have to get over yourself in that it's not about you at all, and it's about their needs. And also if somebody is completely unrealistic about the market, I might say to them, I just don't think I can help you because what you want doesn't exist for the price that you're willing to pay. And sometimes you go through that exercise after months and months and months. Yeah. So,
Are those the two main reasons that you would, I guess, turn down a possible client, that, one, they don't really, or maybe you don't have the right personality for them, and two, their expectations are out of whack? Or are those the two main
Generally,
reasons?
I would say yes. Okay. Yeah, generally.
So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit.
Okay. These are really in-depth questions. You're very, you're well researched. I'm impressed. Yeah.
I know like on a surface level, like, what real estate is. So I guess, I'll ask this then. Let's say I want to, deepen my interest. Let's say I want to, go beyond just surface level. Let's say I decide to go and get my real estate license.
Yep.
After that, that's one thing. You have to study a lot, and it's a lot of work, and then you get the check mark, the license saying, hey, they know their stuff. They're able to be a realtor. What happens after that? Because obviously it's harder to get clients, starting out, and maybe you have to find a firm to work with. Like,
that's right.
What is the process after someone gets their license?
Right. So you do need what's called a sponsoring broker.
Right.
So Warren Real Estate is the principal broker. In New York State, there's only 3 license types. There's principal broker, which Brian Warren at Warren Real Estate is our principal broker. And then you're either an associate broker, which I am, which is a higher level than where everyone starts. When you first start out, you're what's called a licensed salesperson. Kind of a terrible name. Nobody likes being called a salesperson. I wish the Department of State, which regulates all the realtors, all the real estate agents, I should say, in New York State, I wish they would change that name.
My guess was going to be junior broker.
Junior. Yeah. Well, associate broker. So in fact, so of course I started out as a licensed salesperson, and then I got my broker's license. And I could go and open my own firm. I could go out and compete with Warren Real Estate. I choose not to do that for very specific reasons. One is it's a very different job. Right. You as a broker are in charge of all the agents now. I prefer the one-on-one with the clients. That is my gig. That's what I love to do. So I don't prefer to be in charge of other agents, and payroll and staff and a building and basically. I mean, we're all our own independent contractors as business owners under an umbrella is what it is. So I've never wanted to be the umbrella structure.
Yeah. So I guess is the biggest thing finding a firm before you get
well,
the license?
you can have a license, but then in order to conduct business, you need to have a sponsoring broker to associate with. Yeah. They will then be responsible for training you, through the process. And then every broker has a different process for that. You could join a national firm, like I used to be with Coldwell Banker. We don't have a Coldwell Banker in Ithaca anymore, but Coldwell Banker had national training. You pay for that as an agent. A certain percentage of your sales, goes towards that. But so that's the thing to ask a broker is, what's your training program? How can I start to get leads? What floor opportunity we call it? How often can I take floor calls? Is there somebody looking to mentor? I've mentored several people throughout my career. I've enjoyed mentoring people, and it's also really great to actually, there was a quote that I use when they do training of my colleagues, and the quote is, "Don't be afraid to train your competition," because that means that you know that they're going to be ethical, and that really stuck with me because real estate is a weird gig. We're competitive for sure. Yeah. But we also, at the base of it, are cooperative. Because again, as I said, I can only work with so many buyers and sellers. There's only so many hours in the day. Even if I were to work 80 hours a week, which I prefer not to do, there's only so many hours in the day. So when I list a property, 80% of the time, it's going to be another agent and their buyer. Yeah. Because I could only work with so many buyers. And the other issue, which I talked about, is I'm representing the seller. I choose not to do dual agency. Dual agency means that I'm representing both the buyer and the seller. In New York State, it's perfectly legal if both parties agree. I choose not to do it. I've done it. I'm not saying I haven't ever done it. Very rarely. It would be really a unique situation where there's like investment buyers or investment sellers. They really know what they're doing. I'm really becoming a facilitator. So yes, cooperative. The only way it works is cooperatively with the realtors. And most of us that have been doing it for a long time understand the basis of that.
So it seems like it's almost a relationship game in two ways. First you want to, be able to empathize with and talk to your potential clients, but then I guess it also seems like all the other realtors as well, because you're all in a certain area, you all buy and sell the same houses, so you'll likely have maybe more than one interaction with a lot of them.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And it's the same with attorneys. Oftentimes you'll see the same attorneys across the table from each other. They're adversarial, but they also know that there's a mutual goal. There's a buyer and a seller, and they both want to get to closing day, right? So that's our job, is to make sure that happens, obviously with the confines of confidentiality and loyalty, things that you owe your client. But really, at the end of the day, we have a mutual end game.
Right.
Yeah.
So with dual agency, because I'd heard about that a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this year, earlier in the year, New York passed a law changing how commission works for buyer's agents, and I think that's gone into effect. Yeah,
recently. So it was not New York State, it was national.
National.
Yep. So there was a lawsuit which is interesting. It was a lawsuit against sellers in Missouri. And the premise, there were two premises. One is that the real estate agents through the MLS, which is our shared database, remember I talked about a database earlier, that our shared database of offering compensation, because there's two purposes of the MLS, compensation and cooperation. Yeah. When I list 123 Main Street, it goes out to everybody. I'm cooperating. I'm offering it to everybody. I could offer $1, I could offer a percentage, I could offer some sort of compensation. The argument in the lawsuit in Missouri was that that was a collusion, real estate price fixing. That because we published the amounts of the commission or the payment, that it was easily seen by others, competitors, and that the market went that way. The second point was the sellers didn't like paying the commission to the buyer broker, the buyer's agent, the one who's representing the buyer and advocating only for the buyer. Right. They didn't like paying for that because it goes against their own interests. Yeah. Makes sense, right? Of course. The problem with that premise is that the reason why the seller has paid the commission for years and years and years, 28 years as far as I've been doing business, is at the closing day is where the money, that's where the money's on the table. It's on the seller's side. The buyer's bringing the money to the seller, so the seller's willing to pay. Yeah. And then there's these proceeds, these piles of money that kind of go out and get distributed. It was a convenience of the transaction, is what we called it. Well, the lawsuit won. Yeah. They won. And they won some ungodly amount of money. I think it was like $537 billion. Billion with a B. So that was in October of 2023. In March 15th of 2024, the National Association of Realtors settled for, not billions, $418 million with the agreement of two changes. The two changes are we can no longer put the compensation of the seller paying the commission to the buyer broker in the MLS. Not saying that they can't still offer to pay. Right. That's up to them. And by the way, it's always been negotiable. The fees have always been negotiable. They've never been set by anybody. I work within Warren Real Estate. They tell me what my fees should be. And then if that seller says, I don't want to pay that fee, I have to call my broker and say, I've got a seller who doesn't want to pay that fee. Is that okay? And he says, yay or nay. So, but every broker has their own set fees. They're not colluded. So the MLS structure is gone as of August 17th, 2 weeks ago, this Saturday. And what does that mean, so the MLS does not show compensation anymore. Got it. So we cannot use the MLS as a vehicle for displaying compensation. Now, there's nothing to say, and if you look on my website, you'll see my listings that I have offer compensation. Here's what the buyer broker compensation. And it says with acceptable offer, right? The seller has to agree that they know they're getting that amount of money and then what their net's going to be, right? Because they get this amount of money, but then they have closing costs. Right. And they're going to walk away with the net. So that's change number one. Can no longer put the compensation in the MLS. So what that means is that a lot of us as realtors are like texting each other, calling each other. We're like, hey, I want to show your listing. Is your seller offering compensation? Yes, no. Okay, what if they're not? What if they say, oh, I saw this lawsuit and I'm not going to pay. I don't want to pay the buyer broker. I'm like, okay, certainly fine. If you don't want to pay, here's what's going to happen to you. We will see offers come from buyers where they're going to ask for that. Just expect that that's going to happen because traditionally that's how it's always been. There are times, and I've had this happen, where I have a buyer who pays me separately. They're like, I'm going to pay you, and we're going to, even if it was offered in the MLS, I'm going to refuse the offer of compensation in the MLS, and I'm going to pay you. Okay, fine. So the lawsuit was good in that it causes realtors to have these conversations more than they were having before. Yeah. A lot of buyers were confused. Some buyer agents were saying, oh, it's free to hire me. Well, it wasn't free because you could argue the buyer is the one who comes to the table with the money.
Right.
They actually are the ones paying the commission because they're, again, giving the seller enough
Right.
money knowing that they are selling at that price. So the second change, so the first change was the MLS, no longer compensation. The second change is a big one for buyers. And that is that any buyer who tours a home with a realtor has to sign a buyer agent agreement. So what that means is if you wanted to see 123 Main Street, not my listing, I'm going to represent you as a buyer's agent. I'm your advocate. We're going to sign an agreement, and in that agreement is going to be how I'm going to get paid. Now, there's different ways I could get paid. I can still ask the seller, my buyer only has a certain amount of money for closing costs. They don't have an extra percentage to pay me. We need to add that into the transaction. See if the seller agrees. Again, the seller may not.
Right.
We could actually do something called seller concessions, which is, let's say you're offering on a $200,000 house. If we can find one in move-in condition for you, $200,000. Well, guess what? I'm going to charge you, let's say $6,000. Okay, arbitrary amount. I'm going to say, let's offer the seller $206,000. Right. The seller's going to pay $6,000 to you at closing.
Right.
To pay for your closing costs. It can't be to pay me.
Yeah.
It's to pay your closing costs. But guess what? Now you have $6,000 that you were saving for closing costs that you don't have to spend on closing costs that you can pay me.
Right.
So that's the second way to do it. And then the third way to do it is you just pay me
Right.
at closing. You have that additional money set aside to pay me. That's the problem because there's going to be a lot of buyers that don't have that additional. Because while the seller has a bunch of closing costs to sell a house, when you buy, you have your own closing costs. And a big piece of your closing costs we haven't talked about yet is taxes.
Yeah.
The taxes in New York State can be surprising, especially to a lot of states that don't have state taxes the way we have them here. So that could be $4,000 or $5,000 right there on a $200,000 home.
So if it's kind of always technically been negotiable and, some people are going to still be willing to pay the buyer's agent commission, do you think this is really going to change things that much in terms of how deals work?
I think it will. I think it will change things in that I think that it'll be more transparent on how we get paid as realtors. It may cause some realtors to be a bit more negotiable in fees. I mean, you come to me and you ask me to reduce my fee, I say thank you for asking.
Right.
My fee is my fee. I mean, I got to put money on,
Exactly, yeah.
food on the table at my house too, So I don't blame anyone. I don't blame anyone for asking to negotiate, and I don't blame anyone for trying to sell it themselves. You have every right to try to sell your house yourself. Good luck with it, is what I say. Because I have a full-time job because there's so much to do when you sell a house or buy a house. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. And the interesting sort of irony of real estate for a lot of people is we make it look seamless. If we're doing our job right, it looks great. It looks like I didn't do a freaking thing, right? I'm like the duck, the duck. Like you see the duck swimming, but you don't see the footwork behind the scenes. And so the irony is if I make the transaction so smooth and seamless and you think I don't deserve that commission at the closing day, I probably have failed because I haven't told you or shown you my value that, hey, look, I did all this work and it's hours and hours and hours of work behind the scene. And by the way, the other weird gig is I don't get paid till closing. You're taking the risk of hiring me and that I don't have a successful closing. So you sign a buyer agent agreement, you're going to pay me X percent, and then you never buy a house.
Right. What
does that do for me?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a risk. It's a risk reward. Real estate has always been that kind of game. So it's a weird business. But it's a very gratifying business. Yeah.
Given that there's, so many things that go into making it a smooth process for the buyer or seller, is this something that, because I think I've seen there are people who, let's say maybe they're in college and they have a license and they're a part-time realtor or something like that, or maybe they only have, I would imagine they would take on fewer clients than they would if they're full-time. And is that a thing? Is that feasible, or is it really something that you have
Well,
to do?
the problem that with part-time real estate work is that there's a certain time input to know the market,
Right.
right? So you're taking on people and advising them, do you really know the market? So I could see it working perhaps if you were really focused on a niche market, like if you only wanted to work in one neighborhood
Right.
and say, this is the neighborhood I'm going to work in, I'm going to become that neighborhood expert, and I'm only going to do that part-time. That could work. I think the trouble that people get into with part-time work as realtors is they do try to do too much
Yeah.
and take on too much, and then they can't keep up with the demands of the time that the job requires. So there are a lot of people at the beginning and at the end of their careers, right, that are part-time. There's no question.
Yeah.
And the other thing the Department of State in New York State likes about real estate is that, yes, you have to take a class, and you have to pass a test. You have to pass this class test. You have to actually take a test with the Department of State. You have to get a 70%. I wish all my Cornell classes were a 70%, for a good grade. Anyway, you have to get a 70 to pass. And then you get a real estate license and you're free. And one of the things that the Department of State likes is that it's a low barrier to entry with a potential for making, a good living. There's very few other jobs like this in the America. I mean, honestly, where can you go without a college degree and make, a decent living like that?
Right.
So that's what the Department of State wants. They want a low barrier to entry. And they want, if people want to do it part-time, I mean, that's up to the broker, I guess.
What is a referral agent? Is that
That's somebody who doesn't actually do any buying or selling.
okay?
So that's maybe what you're seeing is you'll see somebody who says, or they have some sort of presence, like I'm a realtor in Ithaca, New York, and then you call them and you're like, I'm looking to buy, and they're like, I've got a great agent for you. And so they then contact the agent and they get what's called a referral fee. They call the agent to say, hey, CJ, I have this great buyer. I've vetted them. I've pre-qualified them. They're qualified up to $300,000. And would you take them on as a client and pay me a referral fee? And I either say yes or no.
Do they still have to get licensed, or
They still have to get licensed. Yes, you cannot accept real estate commissions without a license. That's right.
Are there any other types of agents besides that?
So, yeah, there's really not. I mean, you're really either engaged in it or, there's this referral network as well. Yep.
How does that work?
The referral network?
Yeah.
Well, so this is the person that has some sort of website. They're their own broker, right? So they're 123 Main Street broker. And then you see them and you contact them and then they connect you with a realtor. That's not their broker. That's outside their brokerage firm. And they could be anywhere in the United States. So they could, I get calls from agents all like from where you're from in Massachusetts. Yeah. They'll call me and they'll say, hey, I have clients that are moving to Ithaca, New York. Can you help them? Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to help them. And then I agree to pay them a little referral fee.
Are a lot of calls from, let's say a place like Massachusetts or somewhere else, out of state, do those tend to be more investors as opposed to people moving? Cause
in Ithaca, no, not so much because, we have the universities, right. Both universities. So we have a very transitory population here where people are buying and selling for going to grad school, or a lot of times I get a Cornell parent who calls and says, I want to buy a house or an apartment, a duplex for my when they're able to get off campus. What is junior year now, right?
Yeah.
So for the last 2 years of their college, life, that I own the house, and then they'll hold on to it. I've had people with several kids go to Cornell, actually, 2 or 3. And they, in fact, 2 doors down, I had a guy who bought a house years ago, 1999, and both his kids went to Cornell. And he still lives in that house, actually. Cool. He was from Maryland, but he retired here, lives in a ranch.
So on the investment side, I mean, how many of the people you represent are investors versus people who are actually going to live in the...
Yeah, investors have become a bigger portion of the market. But, you know, it gets complicated, and the city just passed a good cause eviction law, which kind of puts a little bit of a damper on the investment in the city, because what that means for investors is they basically have potentially perpetual leases with people. And so that causes investors to be a little bit more wary. So I think percentage-wise, I don't know. I guess myself personally, it's a low percentage, 20% maybe.
20%.
Yeah.
So that new eviction law essentially just makes it harder to evict someone?
Yes, it's almost impossible to evict, yeah, in the city, yeah. If they're paying their rent, here's the problem with it, really. So say that Cornell parent bought a duplex.
Yeah.
They rented out one side, and they kept the other side for their kids. They now go to sell it, and they want to sell it empty, you know, to make it easier to sell.
Yeah.
They have a tenant in there, and now they can't give the tenant a notice to say, we're not renewing your lease. It's called a non-renewal. They can't do it now. They can't give them a non-renewal. That tenant can willingly go, of course. They'd say, I'm leaving, but you can't evict them. You can't get rid of them. If you give them a non-renewal and they're still living there, you can't evict them anymore. So it makes it difficult.
Is that similar to, you know, New York City? Because I
Yes.
know they have all these
Yes.
laws that are...
Yep. It came from New York City,
Really?
actually. Yeah. And it's sort of like a rent control thing. And I get it. I understand the reasoning behind it, although there's been many studies that show that rent control doesn't actually control the rents at the end of the day. But yeah, the housing prices are really a matter of supply and demand, and we just don't have enough supply. That's really the problem. The government needs to focus on how to increase supply. I work with a local builder. We do custom homes on, you know, per demand, and we do anywhere from 16 to 20 houses a year. That is a little teacup full to fill the dent. I mean, we need a lot more houses. And the other problem with the market too is that people aren't selling their house that they might have before because there's so few choices of houses for them to move to. Then they're comfortable in their house and they're not selling those mid-level homes that, like, somebody buys a starter, then they upgrade because they have, you know, bigger housing needs.
Right.
They're not moving from that mid-grade home. They're either not upsizing, they're not downsizing, they're just staying put. So we have like a real bottleneck of not enough houses for people to buy right now.
Has that, I guess, how long has that been the case?
Years.
Years?
Yeah, years. I mean, the last market downturn was 2008.
Really?
That was the last real buyer's market that we had. And that lasted maybe through 2014, 15. From 2016, almost 8 years, it's been a very strong seller's market here.
I'm curious about what you said regarding the rent controls.
Yeah.
You know, you said that there have been studies and that it often doesn't actually, you know, lock in the price of rent.
Well, keep the housing costs down. That's right.
Can you explain why that?
Well, so you have to think of it from the investor standpoint, right? Somebody who has money that they would like to invest in real estate, and there's been a lot of money happening that way because of the stock market, you know, and people making a lot of money in the stock market,
right.
And also people making money. If you're in California, I mean, it's $1 million for anything in California, even a shack. So let's say you sell $1 million property in California, you come here and you buy a $400,000 house. Well, what are you going to do with that $600,000? Are you going to put it all in the stock market? No, maybe you'll invest in another $400,000. You'll buy 2 houses. All right, you're buying a duplex for $400,000. So the theory is that, so good cause eviction, rent control, the whole idea is to lock in people in their leases. The good cause eviction also restricts the percentage that you can raise the lease every year. It's a good concept, but then the thing is that taxes, insurance, all those things, they don't get capped. So let's say taxes and insurance, which this year went up quite a bit. Everyone was hit with huge tax increases. So let's say the tax increases go up 5%. You can only raise the rents 3%. Now you've got a 2% deficit in your budget as an investor. I know there's some people that say even landlording, taking money for, you know, housing is a moral sin. I get that argument to a degree, but we live in a capitalist society.
Yeah.
I mean, until we change the capitalist society we're in, that's the society we're in. So investors lose when they're unable to adjust market.
You need control.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me as a realtor, it goes against the whole idea of private property rights. We should be able to buy property and do with property what we wish to do within the laws. They should not make the laws so onerous that it restricts people from, doing what they want to do with property.
Yeah, it seems like it would discourage investment for sure.
And it also discourages people from fixing up property. Because again, if you think about that 2% deficit, taxes and insurance, insurance is going sky high now. So there's a 2%, let's just say 2% deficit. Well, guess what? They might have, repainted the house. It's due for painting. Well, guess what? We're going to go another couple of years. So now their house starting to look run down.
Yeah.
How is that good for the area? Yeah. So they're not going to put the money in and reinvest the way that they would because they're losing money or their investment is down. And so a lot of people don't have sympathy for landlords, and I get it. But
speaking of investments, I mean, as a realtor, especially if you're in a certain area, you get a very good sense of the market. You kind of know how things move, how things are priced. Are you involved in, do you do any real estate investing yourself? I
am a landlord.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have a 1 unit right now. And I like being small landlord, but I am a landlord. And yes, I mean, they tell realtors all the time, invest in real estate. I mean, I do, there's other things you can invest in. You can invest in what's called real estate investment trust, which is an investment, vehicle where you buy in and you're sharing in several buildings, in Chicago, for example. So there's all kinds of different real estate investment opportunities. The reality is that the money to be made is really with the larger scale investments, and all of the housing that's been built recently have been apartments. They haven't been single family. We need condos. We need condos so bad in this area. The problem with condos is twofold in New York State. One is getting an HOA rules and regulations approved in New York State is like terribly difficult. The second part is that the financing is very difficult. So it's much easier for somebody to build an apartment complex and finance an apartment complex than it is to finance a condominium homeowners association. So those are two big strikes as to why we don't have more condos.
So how do we get more condos?
Yeah. I don't know, somebody has to win the lottery and not care about, the time. It takes years to get an HOA approved. Years. And again, time is money, right? So the longer it takes for a developer to actually, from breaking ground to giving the keys over, the longer that takes, the less they're going to be interested in investing in that way.
Yeah.
So I think it starts with the state. However we could figure out lobbying the state to change the way the HOA rules are done. That's more of an attorney question. I don't really understand all the mechanics of it, but I know it's difficult. And then the financing options for it. Again, the money's there for apartments and rentals.
So would you say that, obviously it's going to help to be a realtor and, have a sense of a market before investing.
Yes.
Let's say a lot of investors, though, maybe don't start out as realtors. So let's say you want to get into real estate investing, but, you're not going to go out and become a realtor before doing that.
Sure.
What would you recommend to people as far as being able to understand a market and identify whether something's a good deal or not?
Right. Well, that you're going to need to hire a realtor.
Yeah.
You're going to need to have somebody that will be your guide and be your, boots on the ground that will help educate you and maybe take you through a couple of options, okay, here's what a $400,000 investment looks like. Here's what a $600,000 investment looks like, and where also, because again, location, obviously number one driving force in all real estate. Where an investment is located is primary importance for return on investment. Absolutely. From the colleges outward.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you know if something is a good deal or not?
Well, there's investment analysis spreadsheets. you know, and any good realtor should have one to help you go through. So you look at, you know, all kinds of different parameters. But obviously you want to look at the income. You want to look at the operating expenses, right? And then you got to look at the debt load, you know. If you're going to finance, what's your mortgage rate? You know, how long are you going to hold that mortgage for? You know, where does it turn the corner after you pay down the mortgage? Cap rate is another,
Right.
you know, number that people look at. So there's really complicated and in-depth analysis that you need to look at when running numbers on an investment property. A lot of people do the quick and easy is a times gross. You could say something's like, okay, you know, we you know, make 50,000, you know, a year times 7 times gross or whatever, it's worth, you know, 350 or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that's a quick and easy down and dirty. But it really depends on what the operating expenses are. Who pays the utilities? Are tenants paying the utilities, or is the landlord? Is there one heating plant and the landlord has to pay for because in New York State, you can't, if you have one furnace, you can't parse that out. If you have a 4-unit, you can't say, I'm going to charge unit 1 25% of my heating bill. And New York State doesn't allow that.
Really?
You have to have separate heating units, separate meters, separate. Yeah, that's a big no-no. So that's another, you know, again, nuance of how does this asset perform?
Right.
Yeah.
So with all these different models, like spreadsheets, metrics, would you say that there are, you know, certain benchmarks or baselines, like, oh, this is a good number, this is a bad number, or is it just all a situation?
Well, again, you know, you're looking at, you know, how much the return on the investment is. Yes. So again, you think about, I have $500,000. If I put it in the stock market that performs over time, 7% annually over time, versus I'm going to put this in real estate and I'm only going to get 5%. You know, both are risky. One's a little bit more risky than the other. Stocks, easier to sell, quicker, get your asset. Real estate, harder to convert into cash. So you got to look at those things. That's what investors look at. It's like, if I have this money and I put it in real estate, what's my return? What's my ultimate return on investment? Some of it's a little bit of a gray area and some is very, very specific.
So in your experience, when is it that someone should make a real estate investment as opposed to, you know, a stock market investment or something else?
Well, it really does depend on their financial situation, right? So, and it also depends on their risk tolerance. You know, same thing a financial planner will tell you, right? It's like, okay, do I put money in CDs and stagger them, or do I put it all in the stock market? But I would say that if you're starting out, to start small, right? And build on your portfolio. So you buy your first, let's say a 4-unit. Buy your first 4-unit, get it to a certain point where you're buying down the mortgage, and then refinance, and then use that money to down pay, buy another 4-unit, and build slowly. That's probably the safest way to do it if you're just starting out.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but with an FHA loan, you really only need a, what is it, 3.5%?
3%
down payment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you think that's less of a down payment, you get more leverage, but then
That's
it's also more risk. So when do you think?
Well, less of a down payment, actually. Yes, you have more cash available, perhaps, but you have a higher mortgage payment.
Exactly.
And actually, yeah, it's hard to get those 3% FHA, you know, loans on investment. Most investment property is 20% down. Yeah. For the investment portfolio. So, yeah. If you're going to live in if you're going to buy, that's another way to do it.
Yeah. Like
buy a 4-unit, rent out the other 3, live in 1. That you could do with an FHA probably. Yep. If it's going to be owner occupied.
Do you think that's a good way to go?
It could be.
Could be.
Yeah, it could be.
For someone maybe starting out, because that way, you know, you're living in it, and you know you get the rent from the other tenants, and they cover the mortgage.
That's right. Yeah. The other question, too, I would ask someone is, who's going to manage it? Are you going to manage it?
Yeah.
Or are you going to hire someone?
Right.
How good are you at landlord-tenant relationships?
Right.
Yeah. You'll get very good at it very quickly, like School of Hard Knocks. But, yeah, I mean, obviously property managers earn, you know, more than their, you know, money in dealing with, you know, And there's all kinds of, menu items. You can have them just lease out for you, or you can have them manage the whole building and deal with the capital expenses and roof repairs when those come due and all sorts of things. So, but yeah, obviously you make more money if you manage yourself,
Right.
if you don't have to pay that. Again, it's all about operating expenses.
Got it.
You really want to look at operating expenses and get those numbers as accurate as possible. And sometimes it's hard to do.
Yeah,
You know.
definitely.
Yeah. I have a 4-unit on South Hill right now for $565,000.
There we go.
Just to give you an idea of what the market's like near Ithaca College.
I guess what can you tell me about that?
They are fully leased, so you couldn't move in until next year. But so it makes $66,000 a year, and we're actually he's just giving me some new operating expenses numbers, but it's somewhere around $14,000 a year operating expenses. So yeah, cap rate's about 9%.
Cap rate is NOI over property value?
That's right.
Something value.
Yeah, over the purchase price.
Purchase price.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because otherwise, how do you?
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been going for a while, but there are
I know.
there are a few questions I do want to ask you. The first is, what would you say? I guess what advice would you give to someone who is buying a home for the first time? How do they make sure that everything goes smoothly and they're happy in the end?
So I think, again, being a realtor, I think you need to work with someone that you can have complete trust in. The best way, I guess, you could, interview a couple of different realtors. You could go to open houses and meet realtors that way. That's an easy way for people to get to know realtors. But you definitely are going to need somebody by your side. You need to get pre-qualified. You need to stay within your budget. And I think it's okay to do some of your own research. I mean, you're not going to know the market as much until I always tell people you have to see 4 or 5 houses to really understand this is a good deal, to feel it, to get in there. So it's a process. You need to trust the process. You need to find a good, realtor that will guide you through the process, get your finances in order, make sure that you're, well qualified, and save up as much money as you can put down. Absolutely. Yep.
So on the seller side, then, what are some common mistakes you see when people are trying to sell their home?
Yeah, the biggest mistake I think that people do is they don't declutter or depersonalize their home, and there's also certain investments that don't cost a lot of money that really make a big difference. If you have old carpet in your house, spending a couple $1,000s on new carpet or new flooring. A lot of people are doing the luxury vinyl tile. Some people love it, some people hate it. But upgrading where you can upgrade is worth it. Buyers right now want turnkey. They don't want to have to pick up a paintbrush even. So I always tell people, think hotel room. One piece of artwork per wall space. That's the ideal when people go into houses, that they want to feel comfortable, take all your personal,
right.
Photos down. And it's harsh when I say this to people. I'm like, it's kind of like you're divorcing your house.
Yeah.
You kind of have to take the emotion out of it and really get to that point where it's not your house anymore.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. People need to be able to envision themselves living there, and if you see all this stuff from a family who's currently there, it's hard.
Yeah, less is more.
Right.
Definitely, less is more. So, yep. And also, I say it to sellers too. I mean, I give them a seller net sheet. I'm like, here's your closing costs. Here's where you're net based on this price range. I give them all the financial information as well, because I think it's important for people to have an idea of where the market's going to go for their house. And like I said at the beginning of our interview here, I don't control the market. I'm here to interpret the market. Right. I'm not always right. I mean, I'm mostly right, not always right. But, a lot of times the market can surprise you. And just I think in general for buyers and sellers, it's a stressful experience. And try to find ways to not stress out about things, let go of things that are out of your control. The market is out of control. When you're a buyer and you're making an offer and there's a competing bid, you offer what you can offer. Give your best foot forward If it's not high enough, there'll be a better house in your future. You can't stress over, oh, they're going to offer this and they're going to offer that. Maybe. You know, it's going to be hard to compete against a cash buyer when you're a mortgage buyer. It just is.
Yeah.
So again, you can't control that there's 5 other cash buyers out there. You know, what you can control is putting your best foot forward, you know, getting a good agent who knows how to navigate multiple offers and tell your story in a way that doesn't violate fair housing laws. You didn't ask me about fair housing yet,
I didn't,
but
no. Next time.
Next time, right? Obviously, we abide by all fair housing laws, but yeah, it can be tricky. You know, we don't want to know what the familial status is of anybody because I don't collect that information. You know, that's just, you know, we don't want to make decisions based on that.
So my last question is a bit of an interesting one. Can you tell me about the, I guess, most difficult or most challenging deal, you know, you've ever been a part of, and how did you close it?
Well, I told you about the one that that the property owner built actually his garage and driveway 25 feet over the property line. So that was pretty challenging. The deal with that particular buyer went away. That buyer was very upset, obviously, and you know, upset at me, I suppose, but I didn't build the garage 25 feet over the property line, and I didn't know that he had done that either. So that was difficult, and you know, then putting it back on the market. You know, really, we had to get an agreement. It was a farmer, a gentleman farmer, and he's like, "I had an agreement with the farmer." I'm like, "Okay, you did, but you didn't have a survey to go with the agreement." So I think that was probably. I've had some difficult ones, but honestly, you know what? The reason why I've survived in this business for so long is I kind of don't dwell on the difficult challenges. There are challenges, just like life, right? Life presents challenges, and it's how you respond to it. And I don't dwell on the challenges. I really look forward to the future. I'm very optimistic by nature. That's what's kept me going in this business.
Well, that's a great mindset to have, and I think that's a good note to end on.
Excellent.
So thank you for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to
I looked
speak
at
with
you
me.
more than the camera, so I'm sorry about that, but
I think that's good. You wanna be
engaged.
Exactly.
I was trying to have empathy for your position and listening.
Hopefully the questions show that I have at least a baseline understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to, you know, talk more off camera with you as well.
For sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.